Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Police Commissioners for Halifax Regional Municipality meeting of today, October 4th, 2023. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd like to do the Mi'kmaq land acknowledgement. The Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we're all treaty people. Does any commissioners have any community announcements? And item number 3, approval of the minutes, September 6, 2023, September 20th, 2023. We need a mover and seconder. Moved by Commissioner Blackburn, seconded by Commissioner Akindoju. Are there any errors or omissions in the minutes? Questions on it? All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion's carried. Approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Madam Clerk, do we have anything lined up for that?
Chair Kent, there are no additions or deletions to the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Seeing and hearing none from the commissioners, we need a motion to approve. So moved by Commissioner Smith. Is there a seconder? Commissioner Blackburn. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion's carried. Is there any business arising out of the minutes? No, have none. Calls for declaration of conflict of interest. Any signs from commissioners? Seeing none. Consideration of deferred business, there is none. Correspondence, petitions, and delegations.
Chair Kent, the clerk's office has not received correspondence for this meeting. As well, we haven't received any petitions.
Thank you. Petitions, none. Presentations, none. Information brought forward, none. We'll now move to our reports and discussions. We'll have 10.1, Halifax Regional Police and Royal Canadian Mounted Police Chief updates. So I started with Chief McLean last time, so it's your turn, Chief Christie.
Chair, good day. Thank you to you, the commissioners present, and of course, folks that may be watching. I only have 6 or 8 points to make today. First of all, October is, of course, Mi'kmaq History Month. So we in Halifax will be participating in many of the events that are happening, reflecting the importance of that cultural diversity. Also, I'd be remiss not to note that the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation was on September 30th. Important day for us. I also would like to note, as council did yesterday, Reverend Wallace Smith's passing in North Preston, a community pillar who will be much missed. Continuing with that sad discussion on loss, today as we speak is also the regimental funeral for Constable Rick O'Brien today in British Columbia. As you may be aware, 3 police officers came under fire in British Columbia at the same time that our colleagues in Halifax Regional Police were at the National Memorial in Ottawa. And Chief McLean may make comments later on that. But certainly in the RCMP, some of us are still deeply heartbroken, and in the policing community at large, that we've had another tragedy. But those tragedies, and I may make reflections of several calls here in a minute, reflect that everyday reality that sadly continues to be such high risk within the profession of policing. So we certainly think of Constable Rick O'Brien today. Changing subjects to a few other high-level points. First, I'm not sure how much this would be of interest to the board, but on October 24th, we've extended an invitation to councillors to attend our headquarters building, where we will have our crime analysts provide sort of a comprehensive overview on crime trends and other things. We call that Councillor Comstat. I think some of you were there perhaps last year around this time. If that was of interest to the police board, I would be more than pleased to extend the invitation. The idea is to have sort of an hour discussion on some of our priorities and things that we're seeing, consistent with the role of generating a vision forward, an hour sort of to look at crime trends and some of those with the expertise in the room of Sheila Surface. And then to actually have an hour to meet some of the senior managers and also to have lunch. If that was of interest to the commissioners, by all means, we would be pleased to host that or for you to join. Similarly, on October the 25th, it will be the swearing-in ceremony for our commanding officer, and that will be followed by a 2-day internal priority setting, sort of a POW-POM we call it, a developmental day, where we have a number of guest speakers speaking to members, and we expect to gather between 30 and 40 employees within the RCMP to look at a range of topics. That could be on reconciliation or cultural competency and policing in Halifax. It could be on the Nova Scotia apology that the CO is leading discussion on. It could be on operational things like effective impaired driving investigations. So we have kind of a practical day and a half synopsis, including leadership. And again, if there was an opportunity, if somebody wanted to drop by and spend a few minutes, you would of course be welcome to that. That will be held at the Woodlawn Public Library in Dartmouth. A couple of operational matters that I may share with you. Just last night in Lower Sackville, members responded to a car that was speeding in the Lower Sackville area. That car, a Cadillac, fled at a high rate of speed, traveling down Lower Sackville Drive. No pursuit was initiated, and that means because sometimes initiating pursuit can cause a greater risk to the public. We did not pursue. Having said that, with the teamwork available, members radio ahead to a different police car, which was able to then later secure the vehicle and essentially box the vehicle in. The responding members noticed indications of drug trafficking within the vehicle and would later arrest the driver for flight from police and indications of drug trafficking. A loaded .22 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver was found on the seat, and other indications of drug trafficking and drugs were found in the car. Just an indication of some of the high-risk evidence or activities that members respond to. Likewise, that's not confined to any one particular jurisdiction. Recently in Musquodoboit Harbor, members responded to a female in medical distress. Members arrived on the scene, observed the complainant not breathing and lacking pulse, performed CPR until such time as EHS and the fire department arrived. Investigation also seemed to suggest that the victim had taken drugs, including possibly Percocets and cocaine. Our members provide EHS with Noxolone, which was provided to the victim. The victim quickly recovered and was transported to hospital. Positive, what we call 1004s, were provided to the members, and so far at this moment, that person is continuing their recovery. At the same time, there's a number of important work continue to be carried out in Halifax RCMP areas, including our colleagues with HRP. In Colchester, there was a reported example in the news where a driver drove a car towards a member that had stopped. It was on the news about 3 or 4 weeks ago. The RCMP initiated quite a significant investigation, and in fact, the suspects were found to be in our area. So Halifax detachment members helped coordinate surveillance and make a safe arrest to take into custody a person that deliberately intended and ran, these initial indications are, towards a member that was sheltering behind a bus. When I talk about there being no borders, I think that's a classic example. Somebody doing harm, pointing risk to a member in Colchester RCMP was then found in our jurisdiction an hour, 20 minutes south. Street crime enforcement team continues to do some outstanding work also in terms of proactive. So whether it's surveillance or prolific offenders in Halifax Regional Municipality that our ComStat or Sheila Surface identifies predicted areas to focus on, or prevention work being around homeless camps or other areas, or school safety plans through the community response team that Sergeant Deepak Prasad leads. There's a tremendous amount of work that has been proactively initiated. And if you were a counselor, like Councillor Blackburn, you would see some of those watch reports go out with the spike and positive rallying by members. The last example that I will share is, again, and these are all recent calls, just within the last 7 days, there was a call of a vehicle entering Halifax from the South Shore. A white vehicle going exceedingly fast was not able to be stopped. So the RCMP essentially created a road blockage. That vehicle rammed the RCMP vehicle at exit 5. The suspect stopped a short distance away and was taken into custody, of which the police dog and multiple members were critical. That file and the investigation is owned by Lunenburg. But again, another demonstration of the risks that many members face. Subject to any questions, Chair, through you or any committee members, that will be my update for today.
Thank you. Commissioner Giles?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much, Chief Superintendent. I don't have so much as a question as I do a comment. There were a number of sobering elements in that submission. One relates to your department's own members who are putting themselves perpetually into high-risk situations, and one relates to the late Constable Rick O'Brien, who will be laid to rest in a mere 2 hours from now in his home community in British Columbia at a mere 51 years of age. And we are getting towards the time in our year when we'll be talking about budgets for the next year, a very important topic. And we will no doubt hear, to one degree or another, cries from one sector, or perhaps many sectors of the public, about disbanding and defunding, which in effect would be disbanding to some extent or another. As if somehow we will be a better community when none of us have someone to call at 2 o'clock in the morning when our front door is kicking in, someone to call who will respond, someone to call who we know will be prepared to put her or his life on the line for the benefit of all of us, and somebody who we know gets up every morning and goes to work, unlike everybody else in the working part of society, who can't honestly say to herself or himself, I'm going home for supper. And I think it bears in mind that we consider those aspects of what you do and what your members do, what Chief McLean does and what his members do on a day by day by day basis. And I have no doubt that police officers can conduct themselves better, can do their work perfectly. But I know also from life experience that perfect can frequently be the enemy of the good, and perfect can frequently be the elusive goal of all of us. So from this commissioner, from this average guy on the street, from this citizen, I have to reflect positively on even the most negative elements of your submission, because I do know that policing is not only an important, but a crucial element of the safety and security of our society, without which we could not possibly have a society. So thank you.
Chair, if I may, Commissioner, thank you for that. I think the topic is also inclusive of the messaging that gets to the membership and the public dialogue about whether their service is valued or not today. And I think that percolates through all sorts of different levels. So I deeply appreciate those comments, and we will endeavor to share those with the folks in Halifax Detachment. But I think it's important, there is a cost to policing. It's a choice under the menu of options that folks in governance have to make in terms of what that service delivery is. And I'm grateful for the support as we bring new ideas to the table, because the fact is the risk is not diminishing. And while there are alternatives to that should be rigorously explored for more spectrum of support for arguably social services, I personally don't believe with 33 plus years of service that it will reduce the risk and the need for police folks to be that support, that umbrella around it. So today's a sad day in the policing community, and I'm sure the chief will make comment about the National Memorial, but the provincial memorial is coming up, I believe, on October the 15th. And I'm sure the board would be, again, very willing, I'm not sure of the protocols, to attend that. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I would like to just revisit your invitation for the ComStat. Perhaps you can send that off to Andrea, and Andrea can share it with the members. I would suggest, though, that members be reminded that should we reach a quorum level, we have to be mindful of that at that at that activity. That's what I'm hearing, at least from our solicitor, to be
Chair,
mindful of it.
I can speak to that.
Yes.
Last year, I believe efforts were made to schedule commissioners for
Yes.
certain days and times so
Yes.
that there wasn't.
I think
That
this is just
compromise.
one this year, though, Chief Christie?
Uh,
Yeah.
I'll defer
No,
to
is
the-
there just one event, one day?
Currently one.
Currently.
And we schedule it for counselors that are hearing from constituents.
Yeah.
So if it's not an appropriate fit for the police board, we can reimagine that if it's of interest.
I have something else to offer, but the solicitor wants to add in here.
Well, this applies to the board, also applies to council, because the board is bound by council's rules. It's really a question of what happens at one of these. There are two questions. One is if there are a quorum of either commissioners or a quorum of councilors there. And the second issue is what is it? If it's an information center session where solely there's questions for clarification, that's one thing. The case law is very clear that if there's any business discussed, which could be by members of the commission or members of the council, which could be the business of the commission or the business of council, case law is very clear that that's considered a meeting, and it has to be advertised and open to the public. So it really depends what the content
Yeah.
of what's going to happen.
So I think at this point, Chief and everyone, I can suggest we get the invitation and we poll members for interest. If we discover that we have everyone that's interested, we'll work with the chief to find a solution to that, or those members who went last year, maybe this year someone else could go, that kind of thing. But let's not jump to where we have to make a decision tonight. We'll poll anyone who has an interest and go from there. And Chief McLean or Chief Christie, will you be speaking tonight to the memorial piece so everyone is aware?
I will.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. You're on.
I was going to say good morning, good evening, everyone, good afternoon, Chair Kent and councilors and everyone who's listening. First, I want to take the opportunity to introduce Superintendent Derek Boyd, who's the Superintendent of Patrol. You'll see more of my senior staff and leadership team at these meetings. I think it's important for them to be here. I want to echo the comments of Chief Superintendent Christie in relation to Reverend Smith. It's someone I've known and have dealt with in the past. And certainly pass along our condolences from the Halifax Regional Police as well. The funeral of Constable Rick O'Brien, we have Superintendent Matthews and another member who actually served with Constable O'Brien are in BC right now to attend that funeral to represent Halifax Regional Police. From that, I was at the National Police Memorial in Ottawa at the time when the news of Constable O'Brien's murder was communicated. I was with a bunch of constables actually at the time, and the news came by. And you're there. You're obviously there for a solemn reason, but that even made it more so. I reached out to Chief Superintendent Christie and Assistant Commissioner Daly to offer my personal condolences as well as that on behalf of the organization. And I've been to a few memorials. I've never been to a memorial where they named off 12 names while we stood on, the grounds of the Parliament. And it goes back to the comments of Commissioner Giles, and I thank you personally for your comments in terms of it was impactful, and the reality of there's already a name for next year's memorial ready to go for. It's disheartening and it's tragic, but we understand the job that we have to do. So from that, I just want to add, so our memorial, the 31st annual Fallen Officers Memorial will be held on October 15th, as Chief Superintendent Christie mentioned. I just sent a note to all of my staff internally to advise them that we have changed the location of this year's memorial for this year to the RCMP Memorial Wall over at Garland, in response to having conversations with Bill and his team, in response to, at the end of the day, it was the right thing to do to respect those who are actually living in Grand Parade at this particular time in tents. And it was a decision not made lightly, but it was a decision made by the organizing committee. And most importantly, it was a decision supported by the representative of the fallen members' families that were there, so that we will have the memorial at the RCMP area. Everyone's invited. We're going to have a bus bringing over some of our members, because at the end of the day, memorials are not about a site. Remembrance is not about a site. It's about reflection. And you can do that anywhere. We hope to go back to the memorial, and we'll try to do things to bring the memorial to the site for this particular year. But what's most important, I think, is trying to reconcile the complex challenges that are being felt in our city right now, and trying to find a respectful way to bring that forward. So I think it was the right thing to do. It's at 1 p.m. It
1
starts at
PM, thank you.
And there will be more formal invites coming out in the
Okay.
near future. But we believed, when I say we, I mean the organizing committee believed that was the right thing to do. Following that, again, as Chief Superintendent Christie mentioned, it is Mi'kmaq History Month. We will be flying the Mi'kmaq Grand Council flag on our building, and it's our support for the traditional lands that we all live on today. As well, the 12th annual truck convoy, which was originally meant to be held in the end of September, but Lee made a little impact on that, and then it's being held on October 21st, which is a great event up at Shearwater, with a fundraiser to support Special Olympics Nova Scotia. I will be there, and if anyone has the opportunity to come by and see the people that are personally impacted by the work of the Special Olympics, it's heartwarming. Today was also the day that, not today, yesterday was the day that Deputy Chief Reed McCombs came back, which was very, lightened my load a little bit. And he's already mentioned that I'm kind of using him like a rented mule, but the reality is it's good to have him back, and he brings his leadership and his experience back to the table. And I look forward to that. And certainly, and even this morning, I got to spend the morning with the Boys and Girls Club over in Dartmouth at their annual breakfast. They haven't had it since COVID. Again, it was impactful to listen to some of the children that have been impacted by the Boys and Girls Club or clubs like it. I know certainly from my own firsthand experience, if it wasn't for the community Y, I would not be sitting here today. And lastly, I want to speak to is we responded to another event of unsanctioned parties in the South End on this week, which I'm sure everyone's aware of. The crowd at one point was estimated to be approximately 3,000, maybe more. I always wonder about estimates, but there was a lot of people there. I can say that with some acuity because I was there myself. By the time I arrived in the mid-afternoon, we had the matter well in control. We had controlled the street. There were still a lot of party goers. They were confined to their private residences and backyards along Jennings. I spoke with some of the homeowners and to our own people on the ground who acted in a very professional manner. Spoke with some of the homeowners. It was interesting to point out that Jennings Street actually only has 4 houses that actually aren't student housing that live on that are on that street, which contributes partly to that problem. We had a robust, well-resourced operational plan that was put over in operational. We had operational periods to ensure that we had an extended operational window to operate in. Because I can tell you, I was also there last year. I was on Larch Street at midnight last year, dodging bottles that were thrown indiscriminately from the crowd. I was there putting out fires on Larch Street last year at midnight. This was nothing like that. There are always things that one can do better. I accept that, and we will certainly look to our plan and around some of our some of our timings. But at the end of the day, I think our members behaved admirably well, given the amount of people that showed up so quickly. What I'll also say is that, and I want to point out specifically, there were no injuries to anyone, and maybe even more markedly, these events always come with some accusations of police abuse of authority, police use of force. It's been silent. So I think the plan that was initiated, and Superintendent Boyd actually was the incident commander that was on scene there even longer than I was, and can speak to the many residents that came out and spoke to him after the event, I think they did a good job. But to speak to Commissioner Giles' point, hard to be perfect. And I think, but at the end of the day, we will always strive to learn from our last events, and we're already planning for this weekend. That's coming up with. Well, not already planning. We've been planning for quite some time. If you're not aware, this event actually sort of popped up, unbeknownst to us in the last little bit, because we thought that the event was going to be held in October. But the thing that these events are very fluid. They're not like going to the Metro Center for 7 o'clock for an event. They occur when they occur, and but you have to be flexible enough to be able to prepare to deal with those. But again, at the end of the day, I had the opportunity to speak with just about all of my members that were on scene, and like I say, it was a robust, well-resourced plan. They did a good job, and I want to say that publicly. And I'll take any questions. Or
Thank you, Chief. Anyone have anything? Commissioner Blackburn?
Thank you. Yeah, because my impression is that the main event is planned for this weekend, is it not? This is sort of traditionally homecoming weekend.
yeah, there is a DAO, so I would say sanctioned event.
Yeah.
That is taking place this weekend. There's the Garrison grounds are involved, and there's some other events, but we still have to be live to the reality that may extend beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you guys are in a position now where you have to have a plan in a box that you can open up, because with social media as it is today, you can gather 300 students at a street corner just like that.
300 I can deal with. 3,000 is a little more challenging.
3,000, well, exactly, yeah. No, excellent work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good luck this weekend.
Commissioner
Good luck
Smith?
this weekend, there, Superintendent Boyd.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief. So on the point of Commissioner Blackburn, so understanding that Dow will be, I don't know what capacity, supporting students in the homecoming aspect. What does that mean for unsanctioned parties? Because we know they go into the street, and having people in streets is not allowed and causes other issues. So what is, and you don't have to give me the full breakdown, the operational plan, but what is the thought that if Dow's is having a sanctioned area, are you going to maybe send people to go there, or are you going to try to restrict it to kind of a certain area like what happened on Jennings Street, or is it going to be I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but very strict on what's happening on public streets? Just kind of give me an idea of what you think.
Yeah, no. So
might
the plan will have sufficient resources in place too. In this particular weekend coming up, the major event is held at the Garrison grounds, which is which is an area that's built for that type of activity.
Right.
Our plan will take into effect that what happens once they leave the Garrison grounds in terms of, that's where the concentration of our efforts will be. There will be some officers, actually, I believe there are actually some extra duty officers are actually being hired by Dow to actually work at the actual event, probably with some other security. But our plan will be more focused on the area that's outside of the actual sanctioned area. We'll have to, we will react to whatever the situation presents itself at that
Right.
particular time.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Commissioner Giles.
Thanks, Chair and Chief. It's always good to know that people are on top of things, but this is an issue which is becoming more severe year by year by year. And we now have residents who are resorting to the media. We now have two-page stories in the Herald of residents who are commenting quite aggressively, quite emotionally on the fact that they are being held hostage. They can't come and go. They're afraid. They're afraid for themselves, for their spouses, for their children, for their parents, for their pets. They're afraid for their properties. They see themselves now living in an area where property values are declining or could decline as a result of the behaviors by those who are fueled by irresponsibility and likely alcohol. Those of us who've been around can see what's going to unfold. Somebody will start with a garden hose and hose down the revelers. And somebody else might start with pepper spray and spray down the revelers. And somebody else might do something else. And all of a sudden, Ricky's going home to his parents in a coffin, or worse. And we have to think about structurally how this event started and what we can do, if anything. And I think we can always do something to ameliorate it to the extent that we can. People who block public streets and will not move along when officers of the law tell them it's time to move along are breaking the law and need to be dealt with accordingly. And I think from the video that I saw, there were plenty of police officers there, but it struck me as odd in the sense that I raised an eyebrow that some of them who were clearly breaking the law, in the sense that they weren't moving along, were using the backdrop of the police to have fun, take selfies, take pictures of the horses, all that sort of jazz. And not saying that we're not being serious, because I know the contrary is true, we're being very serious, but I think we really have to look at a way to get people who participate to understand this is not on. And bad things can happen to people who participate in things that are not on. And I'm not suggesting for a minute, because I know it wouldn't happen or it shouldn't happen, that there will be discriminatory comments with respect to this activity. But at the end of the day, it's not just about the students and their irresponsibility and their alcohol. It's also about the residents and their rights and their reasonable expectations. And the fact that they're saying something's got to be done about this and they don't see the remedy the way perhaps we do.
Yeah, to the commissioner, certainly we make the operational command that runs under a PSU plan runs on a basically a command structure environment. Whereas so individual officers aren't making decisions on their own outside of the structure. That's why we spend probably an hour before we even go out having a very structured briefing as to how this unfolds. Again, could things be done differently sometimes? Of course. Decisions around arrest and all those other things are made not lightly, but they're made in the context of, are there sufficient resources there at that particular time to deal with the potential outcome of that decision? In this particular case, when I was there, by the time I got there, they'd already issued 70 SOTs, I believe, for people that were using alcohol in the manner that they shouldn't. There were a couple arrests made for criminal behavior. By the end, there was 93 SOTs written, the summary offense tickets written for it, which I saw several of them being issued myself. So there definitely was enforcement action against illegal behavior. Part of the operational planning piece goes into when you resource, you make sure that you have the real sufficient resources, particularly over the last few years, and I've dealt with this, is that when the sun goes down, that's when you got to be prepared to have all those resources at hand, which we did. I can tell you that, and Superintendent Boyd was there, that by the time I left, which was probably around 6 or 7 o'clock, by the time I left, the party was over. But there were still lots of people milling about. And I guarantee you, if we had left, the spark of revelry would have ignited again in a second, and we would have been back on Lark Street again, dealing with the same type of behavior we dealt with last year. That did not occur because we basically outlasted them until such time to the operational plan seated at 3 a.m. in the morning. Will we continue to look at our timings in terms of when our people are there and these other things in terms of, but because I think once all the sufficient resources from the incident commander were in place to clear the street was cleared. I believe the street was cleared probably with little, no fights, no nothing like that at the end of the day. But these are some of the decisions that they're not made in a vacuum and they're not made lightly. But again, I do understand the issue with the residents. I spoke with some of the residents that day, and we all lament the fact that we even have to be here, that we even have to be there that day. And for the most part, the residents I spoke with were extremely gracious and they were extremely appreciative. There was some comment about we should have been just a little bit earlier. I accept that. But at the end of the day, I think, again, I'll harpen back to the fact of no injuries, no major incidents, that it's actually, that's a positive outcome in what could be very easily a very negative situation.
Thank you, Chief. I just want to add my thank you and to commend Inspector Boyd for your work that you've done, working in concert with the Chief. Chief, I'm impressed that you were there. I appreciate it. I believe the public would appreciate that. I truly do. And whatever happens this weekend, we wish you safe and successful work that you do to support those folks that are there. At the end of the day, I do know that they are students and friends that in general probably are behaving themselves and looking forward to an annual event that is supported by Dalhousie. And when things go awry, that the public safety aspect kicks in, and it sounds like to me like you have a good plan. I was really pleased to hear that it's significantly different from last year, even though this one was a pop-up. I think it's reasonable to think that this could happen in any community at any time. And now, as Commissioner Blackburn noted, it's have successful models of approach is a great strength to lean on. One question I have in relation to the Dalhousie piece is how much engagement do you have as a police force who is going to potentially take on the spillage with Dalhousie, communications with Dalhousie, to look to the future and say, what can we work together on to mitigate this happening in the future? And if they have ever been pushed to acknowledge that this event, maybe they have a bigger role.
No, to the chair, great question. Couple things. One is that on my way to the event on Sunday, I spoke with President Brooks. She had sent me her number. We spoke the day after in terms of, she passed along her appreciation because she actually lives in the neighborhood as well. Superintendent Boyd is on the newly formed task force with HRM, the police, and as well as Dalhousie University and their vice president. I believe they met today, in terms of actually having those exact same kind of conversations that you're talking about right now. And we'll be continuing that going forward. I think the fact, this is, to Commissioner Giles' point in terms, this is not a long-standing tradition in terms of, I went to school there a few years ago. This is not something that's gone on forever. This is a relatively new, probably 7-8 years, relatively new event. It's not steeped in tradition or honor or any of those other things. And this year actually was, I think, the first year that Dallin actually tried to address that through a sanctioned event and sort of mitigate against this particular issue. But, to whatever degree that actually works. But the reality is the conversations are ongoing. They will continue to be ongoing, and I think they will continue to be collaborative.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Superintendent Boyd, I called you Inspector Board. I don't know if I gave you a raise or demotion, but just wanted to acknowledge that.
That would be a demotion.
Okay, I just wanted to acknowledge that. I guess now I'll apologize. Thank you very much, both chiefs, for these updates and great conversation and great to hear most of it. Okay, we are now moving to 10.21 Halifax Regional Police and RCMP response to mental health calls and data. We have two speakers, which will be our chiefs. So we'll start with you, Chief McLean.
So my understanding is that there was a report presented to this board back in, I'm not exactly sure when, by Superintendent Mason and Mr. Matthew White from the Nova Scotia Health, Capital Health. And arising from that were some questions that were brought forward. And so this report is in relation to the response to those questions. Question one was referred to the total calls for mental health by time and day and days of week over the last 2 years. So the report lays out what actually, there's always a challenge in determining what actually is a mental health call. Obviously there are some that are easy in terms of issues around, certainly suicide or those type of things. But then there are a lot of other calls that mental health certainly plays a factor into them, but does not come forward in terms of actual, could be assaults that are mental health related. But every event that has some type of interaction with ends up with the police dealing with someone who they believe has experienced some level of mental health ends up with a report that's entered in terms of the emotionally disturbed person report. So that was one means in terms of looking at mental health calls. We have a new call code around wellness checks, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with the word, but even that can be confusing sometimes because wellness doesn't necessarily always relate to mental health issues. It could be wellness that you want police to check on your elderly family member who you haven't heard from in a while. So that will take into that as well. And then some of the other calls. So when we looked at the EDP forms, it was actually surprisingly that Tuesday and Wednesday are actually the days that have the highest number of EDP calls. And the weekends are actually lower. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but why that is, but that is the actual number. And probably not surprisingly, early in the morning is the lowest number of calls. And then as we move into the mid-afternoon, has the actual highest number of calls that are put forward. In relation to total calls, we average about 100,000 calls a year. And as you look at mentally ill persons calls are roughly always around 2,300, 2,200. Suicide attempt calls are roughly the same in around 700 to 800. And then this new code of wellness checks, which we just started at the beginning of this year, we're at 633 presently. That's not to suggest these are new. They just would have been captured another way, probably Assist Citizen or some other form, but this ways gets to distill it down. Because Assist Citizen calls are actually, because that can do just about anything. There's a cat crying out in the backyard, or I can't find, so this actually distills it down a little bit more succinctly. But so does that answer the question that was initially presented that
Who
came
had the
from the
question?
initial?
Was that yours?
I don't think there's a question. Sorry, in regards to the motion that was brought forward,
Yeah,
people are looking at me, I didn't.
I don't remember the motion
I
specifically.
can read the motion.
I wasn't here, so I couldn't tell you what the actual.
Commissioner Christie? Sorry, Chief Christie.
Commissioner, there you go.
I promoted you.
Chair, if I may, in all fairness to Chief McLean, I think part of the motion was to enable Mr. Bates and the board to get data from different sets to look at the spectrum.
Okay,
And that's why there was, I think Commissioner Critchley had recommended at the time, sort of very specific areas. Some we've been able to jointly answer and some a bit more confusing because of the type of the data. But part of it was
Okay.
to provide the public safety officer and arguably Josh and the board some additional context.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I can see that. Okay, Commissioner Christie. Chief Christie. Dear heavens.
And there was some other information just before we go,
Okay.
that were contained in there that I was led to believe that were questions that were arising from that first presentation that need to be addressed. They're all there. I certainly can take any questions that relate to them. Just to follow up what that initial presentation was.
Thank you.
Chair, thank you. For the commissioners here and the police board, et cetera, I think the key part was in the RCMP was some assertions that I made or data points that I made whereby mental health calls continue to be a significant demand on the whole police resourcing dysfunction. So some of the analysis, while it's not within the sheets that you have, or it may be actually on page 2. So far, our time for officers spent in hospitals are up over 2020, 2021, and 2022. So we're on track to spend over 750 hours, more or less, at a police hospital. The reasons for that are complex. It's to do with the capacity of hospitals to take a patient and sort of move them in through the system. But it does speak to the demand upon police officers in core RCMP areas to handle and meet that demand. The subset of that I think is another important distinction as an outcome of the last meeting. I argued or opined the idea that the lack of the mobile mental health team in terms of an alternative service model, and Commissioner Critchley had spoken about this, was whether or not we in the RCMP were open to working more closely with the mobile mental health team. As the board may know, and I believe then, I'm not sure of Mr. Moore's rank at the time, but Mr. Moore was part of the architects of the mobile mental health, where you have HRP officers and clinicians paired together. And that's arguably a best practice. So through this process, we've been able to connect with Director White and actually have some additional questions about what does the data look like between the medical side and the police side. And that's not clear because those two data sets are separate. So we learned, for example, in speaking with Director White, that the mobile mental health team may be dispatched to a call, but it may not show up as a police occurrence type. It may be generated through the healthcare stream. So, for example, in some of the initial data that is not reflected in this analysis, it's too early, but from the mobile mental health for their services in RCMP core jurisdictions, something like 75% of the services by the mobile mental health team are non-police generated. And second of all, I would argue from the initial data set that I saw, again, there's a strong argument to be discussed, at least on the senior management RCMP side. Can we look at a value-added story to bring up for resourcing possibly in 2024 to see if we could add RCMP officers to those mobile clinician teams? For me, it's one of equality. It's one of equality that whether you're in Tantallon, whether you're in Cole Harbour, whether you're in Lower Sackville, can you tap in to that mixed clinician team? So the stories and the data that we have here that we provided to the board and is accessible to Mr. Bates, again, I think highlights the importance, given the risk of and the volatility of those type of calls, to have the best trained people to do the first response. The third part, while it's not overly expressed in the document, I know that there's discussions ongoing in the province for alternative call sort of models. There's discussions by the Department of Justice to kind of have remote telehealth, sort of like the mobile mental health. It's just sort of telephone calls, ability for kind of any police officer in the province. The municipality is well down that road because under the public safety strategy, it's imagining sort of navigators at the lower end of public mental health calls. So the discussion about the impact of mental health on policing, I think, remains important. And it should be a discussion point, not only because of the PricewaterhouseCoopers report, not only because of mass casualty, not only because of the public safety strategy, but as Commissioner Giles noted earlier, sometimes there are adverse outcomes. And while I didn't speak about this in my earlier Chiefs of Police synopsis, there's a call recently in Cole Harbour, is my understanding, where even the mobile mental health team showed up and they themselves were assaulted by the mental health patient. And so we average every day, and the counselors may see it on the watch summary, we are regularly having members tied up on mental health calls. And I would make the argument at the end of the day, mental health is a medical issue. And we need to be mindful in my particular role about making sure the evidence, the numbers, the impact on resourcing. Because when we tie up members in hospitals for the amount of members that we're talking about, those members aren't available for the impaired driving calls, not available for the domestic violence calls. So these were the discussion points about, was the RCMP imagining whether it was the CART team, et cetera, how could we move forward? And so we're incrementally moving forward based on an additional data analysis.
Thank you. We have any question? Commissioner Akindoju.
Thank you very much, Chiefs. I just want to understand a little bit further. If there was a 911 call for an accident on a 102, you generally have the ambulance, the fire, and the police probably heading towards that same spot. In this case, and I'm going to put all this together, mental person or mental illness type call or suicide call, wellness call. What kind of response do we have at this time for such calls? That's one. Two, has there been an improved system to attend to those calls ever since 2021 that this has been on the increase? And lastly, is anyone aware of the initiative in Calgary with the Calgary police, where they call it, they call now the diversion initiative, whereby professionals have been included in these calls? Thank you.
Chair, through you to the Commissioner, and I may invite, pursuant to your guidance, to Mr. Moore or Chief McLean also jumping in. So maybe I'll deal with those in reverse. I believe the Calgary model is similar to the mobile mental health team, where they have clinicians, especially trained healthcare workers, matched with police officers, which many people would say is the best optimal model there is. There's the use of force, there's the skilled training of the police officer to sort of arrest, if necessary, somebody, but there's the expertise of the medical health clinician to try and de-escalate and use those skills in such a way that it does not become a police incident. That the spectrum, generally speaking, in policing is mental health is not a crime. So we don't want to criminalize mental illness, just like we don't want to criminalize homelessness. So there's a number of locations across the country that have experimented with that model, and Halifax Regional Police and the mobile mental health team was an early adopter of that. However, the resourcing component of that team here in Halifax is solely the Halifax Regional Police, matched with medical folks from the Horizon Healthcare group, I believe. Your second question was around improved systems since 2020. So, Commissioner, I haven't been in the province since 2020, so I will defer that question. I will say there is much work on the go at Department of Justice level examining this, and many of the police chiefs in Nova Scotia have similar concerns because it's a broad-based impact where mental health is impacting service delivery. So it's broadly speaking, and I invite Chief McLean to perhaps Mr. Moore to speak to the larger initiative since 2020. Who will respond was your first question. So right now, if there's a call that comes to the dispatch center and there's no, mobile mental health person on, and it's a high-risk call, my belief is that is dispatched to a police car. Now, if mobile mental health is on, there is a possibility that it would be diverted. It's just not as clear in the RCMP jurisdictional areas that the integrated dispatch would send the call to that integrated car. The subset of that, and I think this is important because there's a number of examples in the police spectrum where a 911 call may not be answered, and then there's a detrimental outcome. So generally, if there's a call to 911 to say that there's something happening, generally that will dictate some type of police response. I don't want to say it's hard to download or offload that to another service agency unless it's clear, like it's a fire or it's a broken down event that's clearly not policing related and not a life-threatening event. But if there's some degree of life-threatening, my impression is that generally speaking, because of the risk and the liability, police generally will respond. Right? If somebody calls the hospital for an ambulance and just say they're having a heart attack, then if you imagine that call, that may not come to policing because there's an ambulance able to respond. But generally, the RCMP, at least in our experiences, will somehow be wrapped up to dispatch to that call of somebody in crisis right now. If I may,
Just further to your question there, Commissioner, I don't think it's a secret, certainly in media and some other places in terms of, discussions around ambulance shortages and ambulance wait times and all these other things that have taken. And we at the Nova Scotia Chiefs have been involved through DOJ with EHS services around that very issue because we're finding ourselves oftentimes ending up being or people want us to be a de facto ambulance in terms of dealing with issues. And it's not, obviously not an ideal situation, but sometimes when you're presented with emergencies, you do what you have to do. But in terms of, calls, if someone makes a call and particularly if it's around suicide and there's anything like that, you can be guaranteed it's the police that are going to go. They're going to get there first. And we would request an ambulance if it was required. And then we're at the same whim of just about everyone else who's calling an ambulance at the same particular time. They're looking for, certainly looking for ambulance services. So that's part of the challenge. We've also had occasions where ambulances have gone and won't go to certain places unless the police actually go first in order to, basically ensure that it's safe. And sometimes that's, I can understand that. And sometimes that, that's a highly legitimate response given the nature of what they're being sent to. Then other times, sometimes it may not be as clear cut, but clearly, those are some of the challenges, I think. And we're like I said, we're engaged with the ambulance service, EHS, presently through the Nova Scotia Chiefs and DOJ and trying to come up with a better solution for dealing with some of those issues. Because, as Chief Superintendent, I have a hard time calling it, as Jeff says, in terms of, we spend an inordinate amount of time at the hospital as well. And part of that is legislation through the IPTA that mandates in terms of, and we were kind of hoping that there were going to be some changes in the IPTA that were coming to kind of mitigate that, but so far hasn't quite come through. But those are some of the challenges that are faced.
Bill?
Thank you, Chair, through Chair to the board. Just certainly the risk profile is one to be taken, has to be looked at.
Someone's mic is on. If Bill, yours should be on.
Okay. In relation to someone else still going?
I think you just have to push it back.
Better? Okay. That's one of the pieces, because right now, from a mobile perspective, there is the mobile mental health crisis team that's been in place since 2007. That's when it was inaugurally created. When you ask about improvements, there was a independent review done. Dr. Kisley did it in 2010, And out of that, there was found that the use of the mobile mental health crisis team showed positive impacts in relations to the individuals that they were dealing with, and also a reduction in the amount of time in the emergency department. The other piece I would say an improvement is if you look at the information, I don't want to try to interpret Chief McLean's data, but when you look on in relation to question 3, when you see the number, because it's not just a matter of taking people to hospital. There's a certain risk profile in police officers that if someone says they're going to do something themselves, they automatically want to take them to hospital, but not every person needs to go to the hospital. So I think the telling case is in question 4 when we look at when you bring in mental health professionals in partnership with the police officers. And I'm going to see if this is still the case, but those mental health professionals are doing a field assessment of that individual, the same assessment that is being done when someone's brought to the emergency department. So they're able to start that assessment in the field and make a determination of whether they have to go. And when you look at the numbers, in 91%, 83%, those individuals that are being taken to hospital are staying in the hospital because they need to go to the hospital, as opposed to some of the other numbers that are a little bit lower than that. So I think bringing mental health professionals out into the field to make good decisions on who is being taken may help with some of the backlog, not all of it, but some of the backlog in the emerge. The other piece is out of the public safety strategy. Dr. Siciliano's here with us today. There is work being undertaken very shortly that will start to look at an alternative response for civilianized mental health response. In the literature, there's, I think the last time I saw, there's about 90 of them, maybe more than that, that are being looked at. Is that about right? Livingston's work? Let's put you on the spot.
There's like 160.
So there's about 160 civilianized models that are being looked at. Notwithstanding the risking profile, which has to be taken into place, there is, we believe, an area for those individuals of low risk that require a mental health response that may not require a police response. But, I want to say but, they're part of a continuum of service. And the ability to escalate as required, or the ability to de-escalate as required in the response is, I think, the key. So looking at these numbers, we're very pleased to be working with both the RCMP and Halifax Regional Police to start looking at that to see what that model may look like. And there'll be more information to come, and we'll keep the board abreast of that as we go forward.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Critchley?
Thank you. I have 2 questions just immediately arising from what was said, and then I have some more questions after that. So my first question, you speak to something that, you know, both chiefs identified, which is this issue with IPTA and, you know, officers spending long periods of time in hospital, you know, and that's required by the legislation. It says that a peace officer has to remain with the individual. My question is, this is something that I canvassed previously with Matt White when he was here. I raised it with the previous chief. You know, Chief McLean, you operate a prisoner care facility that is staffed primarily with individuals who are designated as peace officers, but they're special constables. They're not police officers. By the same token, you know, the force could employ individuals designated as peace officers and have them fill a role of staying in the hospital with individuals, such that all those, you know, police officers could go back and do what they're required to do in the field, respond to impaired driving calls and the like. So I'm just wondering, sort of, you know, the legislation being as it is, and of course, you know, it would be ideal if it was changed. There was, you know, a colleague of mine was involved in the committee that was looking at reforms to that legislation, and particularly that part of it requiring peace officers to remain there with individuals. But the legislation being as it is, what appetite do you think there is to explore other options, right, similar to the prisoner care facility, to kind of relieving some of that workload from officers who are currently spending time in hospital waiting rooms when they could be doing more important things?
So to the commissioner, so to I guess paraphrase and clarify, so you're suggesting in terms of having basically other employees that would
You could have a
spend time
civilian do that.
at the hospital.
Because anyone, the minister can designate anyone as a peace officer. People who work at the prisoner care facility are designated as peace officers.
Yeah, sworn officer, yeah, booking officers, yes.
Exactly, right, but they're not police officers.
No.
So I'm just wondering, is that something that the two forces collectively would be interested in looking into? The legislation being as it is, you know, you're working very closely with EHS, you're working very closely with Nova Scotia Health, you're involved in all these various committees. to say, perhaps we need to work more closely with Nova Scotia Health and these other agencies, bring in some civilian staff who can be, sworn officers, peace officers, to relieve some of this burden facing the regular police officers so they can go back to doing regular police officer things.
I think there's an appetite for any discussion around that alleviates, obviously, members being at the hospital. I haven't been presented with that one particularly. And I don't know if Jeff, you have in terms of, and I don't have the actual act in front of me that says, some the requirement of members actually that arrest have, devil's always in the details in terms
Sure,
of, so members that actually arrest, are they're responsible for taking people who formulate the grounds, then are responsible for, hold. But I think certainly something to be looked at.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if there's the interest is there, then I'll,
Commissioner Critchley, I just want to remind you that it's sort of not a back and forth at this stage, but if you have another question, do you?
I do have
I'm going
another
to encourage you to
question,
go ahead on that one.
unless Chief Christie wants to answer something in regard to this.
Chair, through you to the Commissioner, I'll just say, Commissioner, I'm on a working group with the Department of Justice, Chief Dave McNeil from Truro, to do with mental health and so on. And there's a number of stakeholders, including, I believe, the municipality on that working group now. And they are broadly looking at the legislation as kind of one subcomponent, but also these alternative service delivery ideas, such as I believe yourself are highlighting. So I think there's a number of aspects in play, but I think the critical piece is not, it's changes by other service delivery mechanisms that have to move. So whether they look at your suggestion or, there's other access, because the primary issue for me is the wait times at the hospital, right? That's I won't say the low hanging fruit, but the data and the evidence shows that's the low hanging fruit. How do we get members to drop off somebody and get them out of the hospital faster? And I believe that the work in the municipality is very exciting in terms of a multidisciplinary approach. But we started off the discussion with some of the tragedies in policing. And one of the persons that, tragically lost her life was just doing a wellness check sort of at a tent in Burnaby, BC. And so again, from an evidence-based perspective, I think to Mr. Moore's comment, I would argue that the policing component is always going to be one of those layers. And we see it in policing where ambulances going to a violent home might want the police to stage with them. So I think we're going to see movement in the spectrum, but I think the key piece is to reduce the amount of turnover time at the hospitals and to see the healthcare system become more proactive in initial response, such as the mobile mental health team.
No, I'm with you there. Obviously, there's many partners and there's moving pieces. We're the board. We're concerned with delivery of policing services, right? So we can only do what's within our purview. So I'm just suggesting that it's, and like you said, there's many things that you and other, senior leadership are involved in that the board is not aware of. And so I think part of it is maybe perhaps just that if there are these other things that are going on, it'd be great to hear about them, because again, perhaps it's the suggestion that I'm putting forward is something that, can be done more efficiently in some other way. But I think it's just a suggestion. I think it's something it's personally worth looking into. I'm not sure if it's done anywhere else or if legislation differs anywhere else, but.
Chair, I'll just say thank you, Commissioner. I'll make sure that idea is pushed into that working group.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Before you go any further, you've had a lot of time. I'm going to just check in with other commissioners. Are there any further questions? Commissioner Blackburn, then I'll come back to you, Commissioner Critchley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, just a couple of questions of clarification. You said 750 hours a year in lost time sitting in hospitals? Just to confirm that.
Yes, so we're on track. Last year was 706 by the analyst estimate. I mean, there's some variability. And so far, up to August 31st, we're up to 590. So that's August 31st. So guesstimate right now that we'll be above last year, but the trend is certainly above last year.
Wow. So 750 hours, that works out to 31 days of lost time. Amazing. And also just wanted to get clarification, because it was always my understanding that the mobile mental health unit will only go a certain distance, and then there's sort of a barrier. There's, they don't serve beyond a certain community. Do you know what that barrier is? What, does it
Sure.
mean if you're all the way out in, Middle Muscatawbet, chances are you're not getting assistance from mobile mental health unit?
Chair, through you to the commissioner, I think I look at that and I've learned from talking to Director White that that's a porous spectrum. So I think the foundation of that model was the HRP, and the clinicians were primarily grounded in core Halifax Regional Police. There are certainly times that the mobile mental health team will deploy to Sackville or to Cole Harbour. There's also probably more times that there'll be a teleconsultation between members responding and the mobile mental health team. The challenge is just because we don't have RCMP officers and that team doesn't have additional clinicians, it's much less likely that that team will physically respond to the broader areas. I think that team is doing some exciting work, and I want to just commend that team. I don't want to be, I'm super careful. I don't want to be perceived as criticizing that team, because I think the best practice that they have done is tremendous. But it is clear that they are more regularly in core Halifax Regional Police areas and less physically present in RCMP core jurisdictional areas, because we're not resourced to be part of it.
Understand. Yeah, they do incredible work, and I think the message that I want to convey is we need more of them. We need more of them for sure. Thank you for that.
Just to add to that, in terms of corresponding increases in police officers, whether the RCMP or HRP, also require a corresponding increase in the clinicians that are able to support them as well, because that's actually a vital part of we just can't give more police officers without an agreement with the medical service to provide more clinicians as well.
Absolutely, be like getting more police officers, but not getting more guns, more cars, more uniforms. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Critchley?
I guess, yeah, my point is, as it relates to resourcing of the mobile mental health crisis team, is the concern that I've had kind of on a year-over-year basis is that, we get an annual budget that's presented to us with, and that it has things that are identified as, new areas of funding or potential overs. But the amount of money, in looking back at budget books from, going back several years, in fact, the amount of money for the mobile mental health crisis team has stayed fairly consistent across time. I know that's, it's at least from an accounting perspective identified in the HRP budget. And the concern that I have is that in looking at the numbers that were provided to us by Matt White, that team is being asked to do more with less. There's a significant increase from 2018 to 2022 of the telephone calls that they're making, from 18,000 to 25,000. But the number of actual mobile visits where clinicians are going and visiting individuals in HRM has gone down over 15% in that time period, from 1,087 to 856. So my concern is that, I think I'm very much on the same page as Commissioner Blackburn and Chief Superintendent Christie, that there's a need to expand the territory in which that team is working. But if it's not being resourced, particularly to Chief McLean's point on the clinician side, so those mobile visits can occur, then there's no point in increasing the area in which they're expected to work. That's sort of a classic more for, doing more work with less. So that's just a sort of final point I'd like to raise, is that, obviously we're getting very close to budget time. This is something that the chief superintendent's raised on multiple occasions, right? And I think it is a fairness and equality concern for people living in Muscatawbet and things like that. So if there obviously needs to be resourcing associated with that. And to Chief McLean's point, it's resourcing on the policing side and on the clinician side.
Great. Thank you. Any further questions? No, we'll wrap that one up. Thank you both, and all three of you. And for the great work. Now moving on to 10.2.2, an update, follow-up update on options for the implementation of the Violence Against Women Advocate Case Review Model. Acting Chief McLean.
Yeah, good evening. Again, this was, I believe, a presentation that was first given by Superintendent Matthews, who would be here this evening to follow up. But like I mentioned, he's actually at the funeral in BC right now. So my understanding was they're in the report submitted, and they did an environmental scan in relation to the VACR across the country. I think they heard back from five, it's in the report, five agencies looking at particular issues around efficacy in terms of do they think is it worth it? You know, what have they gotten out of it? What have been the workload challenges? What are the issues around you know, the agencies, the community agencies that are used in terms of helping facilitate this process, and you know, and what are the improvements to the investigative outcomes? So looking through that environmental scan, from the first part, there's a wide spectrum of third-party organizations that are being used in different locations. And my understanding is that's the decision that's actually made by the person that actually runs the actual program. Should it be the one, if we were to adopt it here, that entity that actually runs the program makes those decisions as to who those agencies are. Certain places have 4 or 5. Certainly, I know in our conversations about it, I think it's important to have there's an importance to have a cultural lens when you're having some of these discussions around these issues. The second piece around workload changes, according to this, London Police was the only one that really proactively addressed this and actually ended up increasing their complement by 3 members to deal with the workload. I think they've all, if you read the report, have said that there has been some increase in workload, which only makes sense in terms of, because there's a review going on files, there's an expectation that there will be files that will need to be reopened or relooked at, or, you know, so it's not necessarily an increase in numbers of files, but the attention given to some of them would decrease, which would be a further workload. The other part, at the end of the day, I think all of them were confident that they had better investigative outcomes, which I believe at the end of the day is really why we're here having this conversation, that there was in fact an increase in the investigative outcomes, regardless of what the impact was to their actually workload issues. And the resource allocation in terms of you know, it's not just the investigative piece, it's the administrative piece, it's the part about dealing with how the files are actually managed and all these other things in terms of. So I think I think the scan showed that it is a positive. That is a positive initiative that potentially, most likely, would have impacts on workload within any individual unit. But then there's parts about discussions around, because the RCMP would play a part of this discussion in terms of the integrated environment. What does that actual analysis look like in terms of, is it every file? Is it some files? Is it a sample size file? So these are some of the discussions that need to be had that ultimately will have impact on terms of workload and some of those other things.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. Commissioner Critchley?
So I appreciate this, Chief McLean. My sort of question is that the motion that was passed in July was requesting sort of a follow-up regarding the progress of the implementation of the program. And I understand, you know, you're still at the stage of effectively assessing the merits. What I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like in speaking to police agencies across the country, they're very happy with their participation in this program. They see it as a net benefit for the organization. That's largely consistent with what we've heard from Sonny Mariner that's on the 2 occasions that she's spoken at the board. So I guess where I'm at now is like, where do you go from here? The work with Ms. Mariner's there's some consultation that's been done with her. I know she's doing some work, some community groups as well. Obviously, you've done some extensive research as well with other police agencies, but so where's the next step from here?
To the Commissioner, I think that the next step is in terms of, is gathering all this information, because I think it is important to do an environmental scan to get a sense of how things have, affected other agencies. I haven't had any personal conversations with her in terms of, met Cindy in terms of where she is with her, the community organization aspect, all this other things. So I think this is just one step in terms of the implementation plan, in terms of when we bring that together. But I don't know if there's an exact date of what we're looking at, but I think part of it again speaks to the conversation, that the RCMP have a role to play in this conversation as well, in terms of, because we're talking about an integrated environment in terms of sexual assault investigations, and decisions have to be made around, like I already spoke to about, is it sample size, investigation? Is it all the files? Because that has an impact, but also what is the capacity of the organization? What can they bring forward in terms of, and I'm not aware of that information at this particular time, in terms of what is the capacity of the organizations that bring forward, that are actually able to do the reviews, like how many people go to take, what's the timelines, all those other things. Those are things that I think still need to be, from my perspective, need to be figured out.
I appreciate that there's a lot of moving pieces with this. And I mean, I wouldn't register as a concern, but the feeling that I have is the board's provided direction on this. Is a lot of work that's been done, and I really appreciate that. But when we had Ms. Mariner here in July, right, the question was really around kind of when would this start? I understand that you're saying that at this time you feel like you need more information before you can provide me with a clear answer. But I think what I'd be hoping for is in the near future that this be brought back so that we can kind of stay on top of that. Just given like the length of time that's passed from when this was initially brought forward to where we are today, keeping in mind that lots and lots of work has been done in that meantime.
No, certainly this is certainly on the menu in terms of taking things forward. In terms of this is, I also have to respect in the sense that I probably have a ton of things in front of me that I have to make decisions on within the last 2 weeks, in terms of, and this is just one of them. So in terms of, to give a definitive answer, I can't do that right now. But in terms of, but certainly it is something, and I'm sure the board will be very vigilant in terms of ensuring that those answers do come forward, which I'm quite prepared to give. But in terms of, like I say, that is just one of another litany of issues that I have to deal with in this next coming little bit of time, in terms of, because I still say this is still 2 weeks. I've been in this job 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So there are still a lot of things, and there've been a lot of issues, pressing issues. I'm not saying this isn't pressing, but in terms of extremely pressing issues, in terms that have to be decided today. And that's kind of where we are right now. But this is not in any way to put this to the sideline, because I think in terms of certainly talking to Superintendent Matthews and CID, they're very alive to this project. And I've been involved in some of those discussions and going back. But the reality is this will be taken forward.
So can I ask, when would be a reasonable time from your perspective, keeping in mind the number of things you have on the go, to bring this back for a further update?
I would suggest, we should have a better sense in terms of, and I talked to Superintendent by the end of the year, in terms of understanding where we are with this program. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Akindoju?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I apologize, Acting Chief McLean. Maybe this is a question I should have asked first. Last time we had a meeting, you were barely 2 days into your role. My question is, how are you settling down?
How am I settling down?
And how you settling down to your new role?
No, listen, to the commission, like I said at the last, I've gotten tremendous support. I've gotten tremendous support from my own officers. I've gotten tremendous support from HRM. I got support from Jeff, and in terms of, and from people in the public. And I appreciate that. But the reality is still that regardless of all that support, there's still a lot and a lot of information to manage and to sort of parse your way through and deal with it. I feel like I'm in a good position, like probably the best position I can actually be in for being here for 2 weeks. But having said that, I understand at the same time, there are those strategic issues that you need to take forward to deal with, but then there's a lot of issues that you need to deal with in the now, right? Which take up a lot of time, effort, and mind strength in terms of having Deputy Chief McCombs come back yesterday will be great too, in terms of being able to, who comes with a lot of experience in dealing with some of these issues in terms of being able to, deal with some of those things. But I mean,
I guess because of time, I just want to reassure you that for us to achieve our goals representing the community, we want to give you all the support. You have all our support
I appreciate that.
in your new role, and totally pledge our support, because our goal is for us to work together as a team so we can achieve the joint goal. So please let us know where else the gaps are and what else we can do to make sure you settle down properly. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. And as a follow-up to that, I literally just sent Chief McLean a note saying that I think that it would be helpful to have a bit of a meeting with myself and perhaps some of the staff to get you oriented to some of the things that had been done. We had to give you a grace period, most certainly, to just acclimatize yourself. But I think it would be of great benefit to you to have some background on a few of these things that you're going to be asked questions about in advance. So if you're open to that, and I think the board, I took the liberty of offering that to you. So
Certainly.
we'll follow up on that. But thank you, Commissioner Akindoju, for acknowledging the
And
chief in
part,
that way.
and part of that is the rationale why I bring the superintendent with me, and I'll bring the deputy and the other superintendent, because it's important for them to have exposure to these exact same things as well. Right.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Commissioner Smith.
Sorry, we're co-sharing a computer because my one's not working at the moment. So my question is for you first, Marty, and then I'm going to go to you, Chief. So as a board, are we allowed to ask for memos that go to the board, or do we have to receive memos at meetings?
Supplementary reports even.
I think the practice based on following council would be to ask for an information report.
Information report. But can we receive those reports outside of board meetings, or should we receive them at meetings?
If it comes out of a motion at the meeting, it becomes a public document.
Right.
Unless it's in camera, right?
Right. Because I know it's like for us at council, we'll get memos on certain things that's not on an agenda, but it just information. So we should only receive information in a meeting as a police commission?
If it comes out of a report, if it comes out of a motion.
Okay.
That's in the public, then the
Yeah.
public has an opportunity to see what the response is in the report, right?
Okay.
Okay. There may be there may be issues that are just procedural issues or something like that.
Right.
So you really got to look on a case by case basis, but you start from the premise, right? That if it follows from a motion in public, that the report should be a report that the public has access to. Right?
Okay. So the reason I asked that, thank you, Marty, and I'll give you some leeway because you're new to the seat. So part of the motion that was brought forward at our last meeting, was it our last meeting or the meeting before?
July.
In July, sorry, was that we would get an update on the implementation piece. And of course, you're stepping in the seat for the remind me of his name right now.
Chief Consultant.
Who presented the report?
Superintendent
Matthews. You're sitting in a seat for him at the moment, so you can't provide all the information. But part of that motion was to talk about the implementation piece, because we got the report. Superintendent gave an idea of what they felt was the ideal aspect of if they were to implement it. And the question was, okay, if you think that this is ideal, could you go back and tell us how you'd implement that? And so that's the thing that I think I'm missing today is the progress on the implementation. So that's why I was wondering if that could be presented to us, or gives us more information as a board, because you can't answer that question at the moment. Just I know that the jurisdiction scan was piece of it, but we kind of gave direction. Okay, follow the ones that you think are most attainable and tell us how you would implement it. And that's what I think we're missing today. But maybe that can also come at another meeting. And the hope was in October we'd get that, but we're now in October and we don't have another meeting until the following month. So I'm just wondering.
Okay, wait, just to interrupt you, because I want to help us get to where we have something to move on. Marty's going to offer a
Procedurally,
suggestion.
last time when this motion came forward, right, it could have come forward as a request for report, right, an information report. And then you could expect that report. So you got this update. So in the place we are now, right, I think you have a choice. You could really, we could have a motion to defer this item pending a further update on those aspects. Or you could put a motion forward, right, for a report, right, on those particular aspects here that you felt aren't included in the update.
Is there a
today.
motion on the agenda for this item at the moment? No.
No, there is not. But rising out of
Yeah.
this, you could make a motion for an information report at a later time, or you could simply make a motion to defer it
Right.
for the chief to come back another time with an update on those specific things. I guess the point is, it's apparent from the response today, right, that you have questions that the chief didn't come prepared to answer at
Yeah,
this
which is
point,
fine.
or may want time to think about, right, and
Yeah.
come back. So those are two ways this could be done.
So ideally for me, I think the easiest way, and I'll look at the commission and the chair, like if we defer it for our next meeting, and then that way we could get presentation from the author of the report and hopefully have some more updates then. So
Yeah,
that would be my,
I would think you might be better to defer it to a future meeting rather than the next. I don't know if the chief's in a position to say that that it can be done for the next meeting or not. I don't know.
in
I
on
just want
that
to make
point.
sure we don't
Yeah,
end
and
up
that's
in the
fine.
same position.
And we can
again.
do that. On that point, again, because you're new in the chair, the previous chief said that they could have it done by October. And that's why we put that October date, because he said, yes, we can do it, have it done by October, which is fine. So if it's a future date, because you have to figure things out, then we'll just do a future date, defer it to a future date of the commission. I don't know. what
So are
the
you
word is.
making that motion?
Yes.
Is there a seconder?
Okay.
So do you want to read that out, Commissioner Smith?
Yeah, so that the Board of Police Commissioners defer item 10.22 to a future meeting of the Board of the Board in order for the Halifax Regional Police to provide further information on the progress of the implementation of the Violence Against Women Advocate Case Review Model.
And Commissioner Critchley seconding that. Any discussion?
I'll just highlight more. My questions are really on the implementation piece, and you can just relay that information back on to the folks who are working on it. Really just want to understand, because we did get the models that they felt worked. So I'd like to see what could actually happen for our jurisdiction. So that's really where I'm at, and hope that could come as soon as it's able.
I think before I call for the question, I'd like to offer as well that your point about the collaborative community agents that have to be part of this model, it would be, they are vital. And I think it's responsible for you to have acknowledged that you don't know what their capacity is. That maybe either in the report that might come back, give us some sense of what you would think is the strength of an agency, or maybe a list of the agencies that you would like to reach out to, or that you perhaps have someone in your team has already done some of that. And lastly, I think what you're hearing today is that this has been on the table quite a long time. We know that we feel as a board it's important. We think that it's the right step in relation for sure into the mass casualty recommendations around domestic violence. So anything you can do to support the board's need and want to move this forward, we very much appreciate it, knowing that you have challenges in relation to your newness to this role. but it's just, we're just putting a point on it.
No, and that's, and to the chair, no, I fully appreciate that in terms of, it, and some of this is about, so when you mentioned that, you know, there was a discussion that this would be for, like, some of this is this is the first time I'm hearing some of this. So yeah, that is a reality. So, but I clearly have heard, you know, from the direction of the board, and clearly we'll move that forward.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Commissioner Critchley?
Officers. So I said this at the last meeting, but I would really like, when this comes back, if you have a sense of, this is the resourcing that we would need to do this, right? I know Ms. Mariner's been very clear that there's not resourcing needs on her end, or at least on the community end as it relates to these projects. But if there's policing resources that need to be put in place to facilitate this, then I would like those to be identified, because we are going into a budget period where, you know, perhaps that could be done. So if that's a friendly amendment, then great. And that sounds great. Thank you, Andrea.
Councillor Smith, do you accept that as a friendly amendment?
Yep.
Okay. Question's been called. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion's carried.
Do I need to motion myself?
No, no, you can't make the motion. Someone else has to make the motion. Because he's got a call.
Oh, yeah. Commissioner Blackburn.
I will move that the Board of Police Commissioners approve Commissioner Yemi Akindoju to attend the Canadian Association of Police Governance Board of Directors Strategic Session to be held in person in Vancouver from November 18th to 21st, 2023, as the board's CAPG representative, and that the Board of Police Commissioners assume all travel-related costs associated with attending this strategic session. I so move.
Is there a seconder? Second by Commissioner Smith. Is there any debate, discussion? Call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion's carried. Thank you. Commissioner updates, 10.4.1, Commissioner Akindoju. We look forward to hearing from you on the Canadian Association for Police Governance Conference in Newfoundland.
Thank you very much. I would be very, very brief given the time that we have. It was the 34th annual conference in St. John, Newfoundland, and this was attended by myself, Josh, and Honorable Chair. The theme of the conference was governing talking conversations, streams, deep dive. It was a 3-day event and basically focusing on governance of policing and the catalyst for change. And this is something that we've all been chatting about: good governance on the board and the catalyst for change. The conference focused on mainly on governance, politics, and the impact of policing and operation. It also focused on the quality of board training, which has been re-emphasized on this board as well, and the effectiveness of allocation of resources. It was deeply discussed on the amount of resource that the board would require to be able to do their job adequately. There was a lot of panel discussion on the recommendations that we've all been talking about, and three of the major ones that were discussed were the Public Order Emergency Commission, Thunder Bay, and of course, the Mass Casualty Commission. The issue of board failure was also discussed, given the fact that for them to give the meaningful oversight, board requires the right personnel and resource to perform. We've spoken about mental health, addiction, and the use of independent bodies, the need for independent bodies to be appointed. There was a deep discussion on panels and resource as regards to how boards and commissions will move forward on that. In fact, the conference was a good environment for stakeholders like commissioners, board members, police commissioners, and also mayors and government and politicians as well. The first day focused basically, like I said, on most of the reports, recommendation on the commissions, and the conference discussed the responsibility and resource and why it's essential not to just listen to the or to ensure proper actions are taken on policy and development, but also a system of evaluation and implementation. Boards were challenged to ensure and to walk through these commissions or reports and ensure the implementation and communication to the public. Another focus of another point of discussion during this conference was the talk on politics and policing. Politics and policing in the sphere of governance. The meeting viewed political interference in the perceived threat as a perceived threat to the ability of the police boards and commission to fulfill their legitimate mandates and to be accountable. Most of these things are also supposed to be part of our strategic plan, and so that we can deep dive into those issues and deal with them, not just talk about them or just read them out to you like I'm reading to you today. I've spoken earlier about the Police Cadre Service Initiative on calls, and I think Jeff has really highlighted on that, the implementation of or bringing in professionals to join them on calls, and I think they've made a good success about it. That was brought up to the conference, and of course, that model was discussed in detail. Day two focused on the alignment gap study, basically on the research to politics, policy, and practice. The premise of this discussion was the methodology used for the study, which was described as appreciation analysis technology. This technology was aimed to determine the nature of the gaps between the objectives set for the police service and the actual service delivery. The result of the study was presented and highlighted to all members present, and to enable board and commissions to use these findings to drastically or dramatically change how they develop their strategic plan. So basically using this alignment gap study, using this model, we call it appreciation analysis technology, to start drawing down strategic planning for the board. And of course, was a lot of discussion on the presentation on drug decriminalization. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that properly. Decriminalization. Of course, that is in BC. And I think that's the first province where that has happened. It was very, very challenging report. And what has happened recently with the number of overdose and that, and what they are seeing due to, I mean, the report was basically that maybe it wasn't a smart thing to decriminalize that. The focus on how BC police is working with province and federal partners to implement the first decriminalization of illicit substances. And of course, the final day ended with a breakfast. We had our wonderful and beautiful chair talking to everybody and inviting them for the 35th conference to be held in Halifax. I think a small committee has been constituted by CAPG themselves in combination with our members here. I want to use this opportunity to thank their member, Lisa Blackburn, for beautifying the table, the breakfast table, with candies and colored in Nova Scotia flags. In fact, it was, everybody noticed that. And thank you very much for all your efforts. I want to thank Josh for his time. He was there all the time, and the chair. That's my report.
Thank you. I'd like to take a moment, if I could, just add to that, having attended. I just want to acknowledge that last year when I attended the same conference in Saskatchewan, I came home and I believe part of my report was that we really need other members to participate. And we had our staff, Josh and Commissioner Akindoju, and it really did create a new learning, I think a better learning experience for anyone who attends. This is a lot of good information, a lot of really good networking, and we have something to offer at that table as a large city and an East Coast city. We learned about the challenges that Newfoundland has. They don't even have boards. They don't have advisor groups. That's not even allowed by their government. So that's a challenge that, might be brought to the conference next year. Secondly, the next year's event, it's as a host, people are very excited to come to Nova Scotia, and in particular Halifax. It was very abundantly clear. They were hesitant to go to Newfoundland, but often only because it's for most people out in other parts of Canada, for them it's a longer journey, and they don't know how great it is here. But Halifax has a reputation of being the place to go, and even though normally the conference is then taken in another direction, because of next year's police chiefs conference and the CAPG conference, they've decided the strength of that is worth bringing it back to the East Coast. So that's exciting for us. And I want to plant the seed now as a board chair, for as many of our commissioners to attend, because our cost, of course, would be significantly lower, but to attend and learn from this conference next year. Also members of our policing agencies. It's not uncommon for police chiefs to be there, for members of other policing organizations, a representative if you can't have the chief. I hope that you will take this, and public safety, Bill and all of the chiefs, to take this back, thinking about next year, that we should have a good show. I think not only because we are amazing hosts in Nova Scotia, in particular Halifax, but we have a lot to contribute and we have a lot to learn. So, and the nation is watching us with what we do in some transformation, and knowing that mass casualty report has been produced and the committee is oversight, all of that. People are watching Halifax, and I think this is an opportunity for us. So mark that on your calendar. And I can't remember the date of it. Do you remember what it is?
No, I don't
Commissioner?
have the date, but can I just
But it
add
is
a little-
August.
Yes, sometime in August, yes. I just want to add to that. The joy of the conference was the collaboration of stakeholders. I mean, there's no reason why the province should not bring Bill to attend, but it's so much knowledge that was exchanged. I got to know more police commissioners from RCMP and regional police than I've ever had a chance to, on and off the field. We had personal interactions, but the collaboration and the learning curve in such conference, I think, like the chair said, we should try and involve not only the one in Halifax, or of course for the one in Halifax, would invite everybody to please join and be part of that as much as you can. But for others that will be held out of Halifax, it would be nice for us to have stakeholders as well from here, to join other stakeholders nationally, to listen to what they do, best practices, and how we can collaborate going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, I do want to thank on behalf of the board, you, Commissioner Akindoju, because as a citizen volunteer, member on the board. These committees are significant commitments, and your willingness to participate has not gone unnoticed, and we appreciate that. Thank you. So at this stage, we have one more, 10.4.2, Commissioner Blackburn, Nova Scotia Association of Police Governance Annual Conference.
Thank you very much. And while Commissioner Akandoji was in Newfoundland, I was in beautiful downtown Bridgewater for the NSAPG conference on September 13th and 14th. Couldn't stay for the final day, but passed the baton off to Josh, who represented us very well as a speaker and as an attendee. I did submit my written report, so I'm not going to regurgitate that, but just, some of the highlights for me was the Department of Justice Deputy Minister Candace Thomas and her sort of State of the Union address to everybody there. Based on her presentation, there's a lot of good things happening behind the scenes. We found out that the mass casualty, the work is done, the report submitted, but they are now making progress on a weekly basis. They actually have a dedicated group that meets weekly to discuss those recommendations and how to implement them. Gender-based violence will play a key feature in that work. And as Ms. Thomas said, we need an all-government approach to this. Funny enough, when she mentioned policing review, she said nothing formal to announce. I guess we got that yesterday. And with regards to the Wortley report, Ms. Thomas indicates that the research committee has been struck to advance development and implementation of the data collection model. That work started apparently in April. And they're also working right now on an Indigenous justice action strategy. The DOJ has hired a Mi'kmaq consultant who will partner with the community, and they're taking a real nothing about us without us approach to this work. She also touched on challenges of training and recruiting. We also received quite a good presentation from the Atlantic Police Academy talking about the changes that they are making to push more cadets out in a more timely manner. Also, Ms. Thomas discussed the training for police boards, and she says that they do have a program in place, but it was reviewed after the mass casualty report, and that is now being revamped. Other than that, had a great presentation on the integrated enforcement unit in New Brunswick, how their model has proven to be somewhat successful after a bit of a rocky start. They started in 2008, folded in 2016 because of budget issues, but they are reborn in 2022 and are making a real difference in New Brunswick. And finally had a rather entertaining presentation about ATF, the American ATF, and I had no idea that they actually had agents that served in Canada, and so had a good overview of the work they do and how they can potentially help local police in jurisdictions right across Canada. And finally, I must say that congratulations in order to Chief Don McLean. He was on the winning golf team. The golf tournament is on the first day of the conference. I had no idea it was that cutthroat. They take that seriously. There are trophies that are handed out. There are winning teams. There are winners and losers, and you wear that for the rest of the year. So congratulations, Chief McLean, on winning the golf tournament. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Blackburn. It sounds like that might be an activity that us Nova Scotians can provide at the CAPG conference next year for the national conference. I do want to acknowledge as well, Josh, your efforts and your work on the presentation that you made. I've heard many people have expressed how well you did. The information was helpful, and that you just did a great job. So I've also heard from the minister himself that the Minister of Justice, that he now has other boards wishing that they had money for staffing. But you and I have discussed that, and we haven't flushed it out yet, but we think that, being a large city, we have a responsibility as well to share some of the information and models and things that we get to benefit from through having this policy advisor and such. So maybe some openness to sharing with our other colleagues around the province would be a great benefit to them, even though our municipality is bearing the cost. So, but just well done, and thank you for doing that. So at this stage, I think that's our last item, and we will be now going into in-camera, and those in-camera items would not need any of you folks. So we wish you well tonight. You don't have to stick around, but please, there is food. Help yourself to supper. If you have the time, take out with you into your car if you don't. And then the members will take a 5-minute break. We'll meet. If we don't have anyone here, we could meet in here, correct? Would that, no, we have to go
because
inside.
we are still live streaming.
Okay, so then we will go into the meeting room and,
So
Yeah.
Chair,
Yes.
are we going to do the in-camera minutes before we go in camera? And we'll also need a motion to go in camera.
I'll move the in-camera minutes of September 6th and September 20th, 2023 be approved as circulated. I so move.
seconded by Commissioner Smith. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion's carried. So we have an admin item. Do you want to do that inside? Okay, so we'll be doing
I
that.
move that we go in camera.
Thank you.
Ratification motion that the Board of Police Commissioners, 1, adopt the direction provided in camera, open parentheses, in private, close parentheses, and 2, direct that the private and confidential report dated August 1st, 2023, and the private and confidential handouts dated September 18th, 2023, and October 4th, 2023, be maintained private and confidential. So moved.